Welcome back to Legitimate Targets, everybody. I hope you're all having a great day. It's been a while since we had Scott Ritter on the show, but he was, I think, one of the first guests that we ever had on this show a year ago, as of this week. So I'm honored to have him back, as always, to talk, and we got a lot to talk about. So unless you've been living under a rock, you probably know Scott Ritter, former U.S. Marine Intelligence Officer and United Nations Weapons Inspector, and hardcore truth teller when it comes to all geopolitical issues that we cover on this show. So, Scott, thank you so much for joining me. How you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks. Yourself?
Good. I want to start off asking you about a new report that just came in before we went live. Ynet News, Israeli media reports that Israel, Netanyahu in particular, in a conversation with Putin last week as these Russian military aircraft are landing in Iran, they had this call and Netanyahu said, look, I want you to convey a message to the Iranians that we are not looking for war. But everything besides that kind of indicates they are. What do you make of this?
Well, I can say that I had the honor and privilege of being in a meeting with the Iranian president and the Iranian foreign minister a couple of weeks ago, and listened to this man talk about these very type situations. If all you have to go on when is what other people think of things, I'm here to tell you right now, that's not a good way of going through life. Because prior to meeting the Iranian president, if I had gone off of what I read, especially from, Iranian, sort of a lot of the Iranian voices that resonate here, he's a weak man. He's a sellout. He's compromised. He doesn't have the best interests of Iran in heart, et cetera, et cetera. The man I met was not that. He was very strong, very confident, and very much in love with Iran and was working to promote things. But he's also a man who said that they believed that Israel was going to attack them and that they were ready for this, that they weren't looking for war, but they were prepared for war. He's also a man who was honest that the 12-day war that was fought back in June hurt. He said the Israelis hurt them bad, killed their senior military leadership, killed nuclear guys, blew up nuclear facilities. Damage was done. It was painful. He also was honest that sanctions hurt the Iranian people. It's not good. They're not, the Iranian government understands the consequences of actions that lead to sanctions, lead to problems. And he said that this had created some fractures in Iranian society before the 12-day war. There was a division between the presidency and the supreme leader. And for people in the West to go, wait, how can that be? Iran is a dictatorship of the theocracy, is it not? I'm like, well, no, it's actually a democracy. They have a constitution and the president's a pretty powerful dude. And so it's not a good thing to have a difference between the president and the theocrats. But what he said is because of the 12-day war, Iran is more united today than they've ever been. They are stronger. Whatever fractures there, they've been super glued back together and they ain't breaking. And so there's a lot of confidence that's there. And one of the reasons why there's confidence is that we have to deal with certain realities. Yes, the Israelis hurt the Iranians. That tends to happen when you get a surprise attack. I mean, the Japanese hurt the United States Harbor. They hit us with a Sunday punch on Sunday, and it hurt. But we sort of picked ourselves up, dusted ourselves off, and almost 4 years later in Tokyo Bay, the Japanese surrendered unconditionally to us because we beat them. Israel hit Iran, but 12 days later, it was Benjamin Netanyahu picking up the phone, begging Donald Trump to intervene to bring about a ceasefire. Why? Because the Sunday punch didn't knock Iran out. It hurt Iran, but Iran adapted. Again, a lot of people only read what the West wants them to read about this war. Read what the Iranians are saying. They've been pretty open about this. It was fascinating. I don't know if you saw the program where the Iranian pilots were talking about how they were intercepting the Israelis, not to shoot them down. They're not claiming they shot down the Israeli Air Force, but the Israelis to attack, they were using this missile system called the Blue Streak, I believe. There's a red streak and a silver streak and a black streak, but the Blue Streak was the main one. To do this, you have to fly an attack profile. And so you're coming in and you're getting everything locked in, then you're going to release the missile and it's going to go to its target. But as they're flying that attack profile, the Iranian Air Force is coming in and locking in, getting their target acquisition radars to lock in on the Israelis. The Israelis had to break off their attacks, which means this idea of Israeli air supremacy, where they're getting to do whatever they want, wasn't the case. Actually, near the end of the war, the majority of Israeli attacks were being broken off because the Iranian Air Force, which everybody thought had been destroyed, was up and flying and working and intercepting. So that's something. The Israelis got their knockout punch because for 10 years, the Mossad had built this network of, covert operatives who were building drone factories. And they had these drone launch vehicles that they were running around and they flew them off and they hit missiles, they assassinated people, the whole thing. Well, that's gone. All those Mossad dudes are dead, hung by the neck until dead. All the factories have been discovered and destroyed. That's gone. The Israelis were able to hurt Tehran because they were able to fly through Syria into Azerbaijan and then come in through the Caspian Sea and attack from the rear, which was unprotected. That won't happen again. The Russians been flying, as you insinuated, nonstop heavy lift cargo. They're bringing in radars, missile defenses, and aircraft. There's modern versions of the MiG-29 flying over there with advanced search radars. That won't happen again. So all the things that gave Israel the advantage for their knockout blow, they don't exist anymore. Meanwhile, the Israeli missile defense system, which failed, hasn't been repaired. I mean, it's not any better. It's the same that it was. They're still trying to replace the missiles. The United States, we brought in Aegis class destroyers and cruisers. We pretty much shot through our SM-3s and SM-6s, our missile interceptors. We fired a year's worth of production in 12 days. And there's nothing to replace it. The THAAD is supposed to be this great system, doesn't work. And that's against Iranian missiles that were 20 or 30 years old. Near the end of the war, Iran was firing new missiles, not as many, but they weren't getting hit. They were coming through. They were hitting targets that hurt. And the Israelis now have admitted this hurt. That's why Netanyahu made the phone call. If Israel were to attack Iran today, it would go very bad for Israel very quickly. And if the United States were to intervene on behalf of Iran, it'd go very bad for the United States very quickly. So even though the Iranian president is saying that he's ready for a war and he believes one's going to come, this Ynet story rings true. Because while Russia is providing the support to Iran, that means that Russia has the ear of the Iranians. And what Netanyahu wanted to say is, we're not going to attack you. And I agree with that assessment because I don't see the Israelis having any way to accomplish this mission. They're weaker than they were when they started the 12-day war. And Iran is stronger than they were because Iran's learned a lot of lessons. So I do think the story rings true. And this is good news. This is really good news because what the Middle East needs right now, what West Asia needs right now is stability. And the most destabilizing part of that whole region is the potential of Israel and Iran to go to war against one another. We still have the issue of Iran's nuclear program that has to be resolved. And that's not going to be an easy thing. But right now, I think keeping Israel from initiating an attack is a good thing.
Mm-hmm. The biggest thing that I think everyone pointed out for Iran that they needed to fix, and this was a subject of conversation before the war began, was I don't know the exact technical terms, but people were bringing up the question of having a very strong Iranian air defense that was integrated with the Russian system in some way, shape, or form. I don't know. I haven't seen any indication that they've done this or that it could. I don't even know if it could be done that quickly, but you think Iran could fix some of their air defense problems in the short time that's passed since the 12-day war?
I think, again, the Iranians are reticent about talking about certain things because, they don't want people to know how good they are or how vulnerable they are. But one of the things that I have been led to believe is that when the Mossad-controlled drones were going out and striking critical air defense systems, that rather than keep the systems in play, Iran withdrew the systems, shut them down, got them out of harm's way to preserve capabilities, because you're being hit from a vector that was unpredicted and can't be defended against using the systems. So they preserve them. So the ability of Iran to, I don't know if you hear my dogs, but they're going crazy right now because the town has decided they're going to repave the road in front, and so there's people wandering around, and the dogs are taking umbrage at that. But so I apologize to your audience for this. But I think the Iranians have the ability to reconstitute their air defense more quickly than might have suspected, given what happened during the war. Because I think they preserved a lot of it. They had already been talking with the Russians about S-300s and bringing in Pantsir and other things. Not that it was unknown to them, but getting disparate architecture to communicate with one another is it doesn't happen overnight. But I would say this, that the Russians and the Iranians appear to be talking and to have been talking for some time now. And given what happened, the 12-day war, I think this would be one of their top priorities. And if Russian scientific minds and Iranian scientific minds, all of whom are attuned to the reality of air defense, talk, I don't think Russia's pouring in equipment just to have it sit in a warehouse. I think Russia's pouring into equipment because an architecture framework has been agreed upon, and that this equipment's going to plug in and be ready to be used. This would require training of Iranian experts. Again, I don't know if that's happened, but the security agreement between Russia and Iran has been ratified by both parties. It wasn't ratified in the lead up to the 12-day war. And there are classified annexes there which I assume, based upon similar agreements that have existed in the past. And, Russia is a nation of habit, and a lot of their habit is, comes from Soviet times. I'm very familiar, for instance, with what the Russians did with the Iraqis about Scud missiles and how Iraqi troops would go to Samara and be trained in the missile defense force and would, use their equipment to proof it, and all the Russian advisors would come in. I think that's what a classified annex looks like. And I'm fairly confident to say that Iranians have probably been in the appropriate schools in Russia receiving the training, that they've tested these in live fire exercises in Russia, so that the first time when they fall on their equipment, it won't be the first time they've operated. If they ever have to use it in combat, they'll know what to do. It won't be, oh no, what do we do? And I think the Israelis understand this too. The Israelis are fully cognizant of what's been happening. And so I do believe that Iran's air defense system is up and running and is being strengthened as we speak. And the Iranians learned. I mean, you now have to have counter-drone capability deployed with your air defense. That's just a part of the reality of modern warfare. They didn't have that before, and they lost some very valuable assets. They preserved a lot of their Air Force, but there were some limitations on how they could use their Air Force. They had to operate out of Western Iran and approach the Israelis, get the Israelis closer. They had to yield the Tehran airspace because they didn't have the ability to deal with, aircraft coming out of Azerbaijan. Now you have modern MiG-29s flying over Tehran. They've sealed off the Caspian Sea. I think the Iranians are in a very good place, and I think the Israelis know this.
And one more question about the Russia-Iran relationship. You've mentioned the modern MiG-29s. There was also the leaked Rostec, order for 2026 to 2028 MiG-29s and Su-35s. I'm assuming that means that they don't have the higher tech aircraft yet. We haven't seen any satellite proof of this. Um, Presumably, this would be coming later on. Is that what the order insinuated?
I think the fact that, you talk about an order that talks about advanced MiG-29s coming in 2026 and beyond, and here we are in 2025, and we have advanced MiG-29s flying over Tehran airspace. The Russians have acted by not developing export models, but I think the aircraft flying over Tehran right now are Russian frontline MiG-29 fighters, the best that Russia has. And Russia has stepped up to the plate because there was a lot of perception that Russia wasn't doing its job, wasn't, that Russia was going to yield the Iranian market to China, etc. I think Russia delivered the best MiG-29s in their arsenal to Tehran. Su-35 is different. The complexity of the system, the fact that it is a frontline system in the ongoing conflict with Ukraine, so there's competing requirements, that this might be something that isn't available today to the Iranians. To train an Iranian pilot to be an Su-35 pilot is a completely different thing. To maintain the Su-35, things of that nature, you need to send people to schools. These schools are long, and you need to have the systems available. So while I don't believe the Iranians are going to wait until 2029 to get the Su-35, in fact, when you look at some of these cargo planes are flying out of cities associated with Su-35 production. And so I think you're starting to see Su-35 infrastructure deployed to Iran because you have to create the ability to absorb the aircraft. So I think the Russians gave the MiG-29s there. That's fulfillment. They're putting in MiG-35 or Su-35 support infrastructure. And who knows, maybe there's some Iranian pilots out in Novosibirsk somewhere getting trained on the Su-35 so that when the aircraft are ready, the Iranians are ready to use them. You have infrastructure in place, you have trained pilots, but it takes time. To rush this is to invite disaster. Because if you rush a capability that people aren't ready to use, then you're going to lose that capability if called upon to do so. The last thing either Iran or Russia would want is to have Iranian pilots in Su-35s and have them shot down or lost in an operational incident because they weren't ready. The Russians are professionals, and so are the Iranians, and they will do what is necessary to be prepared to employ the Su-35 to its full capacity when the time comes, and they're not going to rush that process.
How much do you think the Gaza ceasefire potentially implicates this conflict with Iran? Because obviously Netanyahu's got his personal court dealings with his wife. He's also got to think about the hardline far rights that are saying, this is terrible. We're going to vote against the Gaza ceasefire, the hostage deal. Smotrich came out and said that. Does Netanyahu have anyone to fall back on? Because he hasn't since October 7, 2023, on the more liberal side of Israeli politics. Does he have anyone to fall back on at a moment when possibly this coalition that he's depended on might be fracturing yet again?
I don't know. That's a $1 million question. That's a good question. But he has no choice. The fact of the matter is, this peace deal has come together for a number of real reasons. One, Hamas won this war. I mean, people don't understand it. The peace deal is actually almost point for point the plan that Hamas has been putting forward when we talk about a ceasefire. Go back to October 2023, after October 7th, when they were first talking about a ceasefire in November. The points articulated by Hamas are the points that are the heart of the Trump plan. So what changed? Hamas wasn't defeated. What changed was Israel. Israel has come to the realization it can't win this war, can't win militarily, And politically, they're more isolated internationally than they've ever been. One of the Hamas strategies articulated, again, I wrote about this in November of 2023, was to let Israel be Israel, that the best weapon Hamas had to defeat Israel was Israel, because Israel would commit genocide. They knew that. We knew about Daiwa doctrine. We knew about mowing the grass, but it was all theory. Now we got to see it in reality. And the world now has come to the recognition that Israel is a murderous, genocidal state. This is why we see the International Court of Justice, make the decisions of the International Criminal Court actually indicting. We see Europe starting to recognize a Palestinian state, things that never would have happened before. But more importantly, from Netanyahu's perspective, Israel's losing the United States. I mean, Donald Trump has said Israel doesn't control Congress like it used to. It used to have an iron grip. It's weakening. And the whole Charlie Kirk thing, without going too far down that rabbit hole, showed that the Christian evangelical Christian Zionist movement was starting to question the unquestioned support of Israel. And support was bleeding off quick. So Netanyahu had to agree to these terms because he doesn't have any choice. To continue down the path he was going would, not only turn the world against him, he was ready. He said, he gave a speech last month. He said, Israel is more isolated today than it ever has been, and Israel will have to become self-sufficient. But Israel can't be self-sufficient. Self-sufficiency means the U.S. taxpayer underwrites the cost of Israel, which he had every right to believe would continue because of the control that the pro-Israeli lobby has. But today, that's not guaranteed anymore. And if you lose America, you lose everything. And it's not just Netanyahu that's realizing this. Yes, you have the hardliners, Ben Gvir, Smotrich, and others. They are never going to be part of a peace solution. They don't believe in peace. Netanyahu is a political realist. He knows what you just alluded to, that if he is moved out of office and there isn't a deal in place, he's going to be arrested, taken to court. He and his wife will be found guilty of corruption, and he will probably die in an Israeli prison. So can he build a coalition? I think he has to build a coalition. Benny Gantz is a guy that I think he could do business with in the short term. Gantz could view a coalition with Netanyahu as a stepping stone to him becoming prime minister in a post-Netanyahu reality, where Netanyahu leaves the post with immunity not only for the crimes that he's committed, he and his wife, prior to October 7th, but immunity from any criminal liability for his failure on October 7th. What happened on October 7th. Maybe he goes into retirement in Miami. His son has spent a lot of time avoiding military service, buying up properties in Miami, and maybe that's where Bibi and Sarah you come to. They'll have to do their own laundry because he won't be the prime minister anymore. He can't bring his dirty laundry for the State Department to do. But that this new reality that Americans are starting to question the unquestioned support of Israel is something Israel's never had to deal with before. And I do think it creates, new political realities that have to be taken into account by anybody in Israel who understands that if you lose America, Israel's done. It's finished. And so if that means that Benny Gantz has to make a short-term, coalition of convenience with Netanyahu so that Netanyahu can survive the right-wing parties fleeing, so be it. Then if Gantz is smart, he creates the conditions that allow Netanyahu to leave Israel, avoid prosecution, and now he's prime minister, which is the objective of any politician, is to become top dog. I'm not saying that's happening. I'm not saying there's evidence that that's happening. I'm saying there's potential for this to happen. The idea that Netanyahu is held hostage now, the way that he was during war, when there was no chance for peace, when Gantz would never join a Netanyahu coalition, that doesn't exist. These people can quit the party, and if Netanyahu is clever, and again, this is where Donald Trump comes in, because Trump can make a phone call up Gantz, say, you're in a coalition.
Yep.
Continued American military support hinges on you joining the coalition. You're going to join this coalition, and you're going to do what I'm going to tell you to do. You're going to not prosecute this guy. You're going to get him out of the country. There's going to be a deal, and then you and I are going to work for a longer, broader peace. But and I think Trump now has there's a reason for him to do this now. He's invested a lot of political capital. This is his peace deal. This is his Nobel Peace Prize. Even if he doesn't get it, he's going to award it to himself. But he can't do that if this falls apart, and he can't have Netanyahu sabotage this. So there's a lot of incentive for Donald Trump and the United States government to become very creative on the pressure points that can be put on Israel to ensure that this plan survives.
Well, let's hope for it. I can't say I'm extremely hopeful, but I will continue to hope. And
that's all we got, man. That's all we got.
if for nothing else than Trump's own vanity, this could work. So Scott Ritter, thank you so much for joining me. Exceptional commentary and analysis as always. And you're 100% right also about the point about Hamas winning. I mean, this is what Kissinger always said. If you can't kill the guerrillas, if you can't completely vanquish them, then they are the victors. And the only question is the disarmament. And I don't know how viable that even is, even if it's a talking point that they say they're going to It's like, what are you going to do?
Well, they've agreed to it. But I'm sure there's heavy caveats attached to that require behavioral modification on the part of Israel that to date they've been unable to do. But this is where Donald Trump's ego comes into play. He wants that damn Nobel Peace Prize.
We'll see. Scott Ritter, thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.